The arrival of the humans. The 430th Galactic Edible Plant Competition was a grand affair, one that drew the attention of countless species from across the galaxy. This annual event was held in the heart of the galactic capital, where delegates from various worlds gathered to showcase their finest agricultural creations. For centuries, it had been a tradition, one that upheld simplicity, discipline, and order. Each species was allowed to present just one type of plant, ensuring that the competition remained manageable and fair. The goal was to celebrate the diversity of the galaxy's edible flora, while also honoring the unique agricultural techniques of each species. Serat, a towering figure from the Serat species, was one of the primary organizers and judges of the event. Standing nearly 12 feet tall, with a multi-jointed body and elongated limbs, Serat's presence was impossible to ignore. His species had a reputation for being meticulous and organized, traits that made them well-suited for overseeing such a prestigious event. He was used to the quiet hum of order and precision that came with such competitions. Every year, the process was the same. Species arrived, each with a single plant to submit, and the judges evaluated them based on quality, presentation, and taste. But this year, something was different. As Serat stood at the edge of the sprawling arena, watching the first of the transports arrive, he couldn't shake the feeling that the competition was about to be upended. The usual transports were sleek and efficient, carrying a few hundred individuals from each species, each of them with a carefully selected plant. It was a system that worked. But then came the humans. At first, it was nothing more than a distant rumble, a noise that grew louder as it drew closer. The other delegates raised their heads in curiosity. The noise grew to a crescendo as a battered transport barge appeared from the shadows of the distant spaceports, its hull scarred from years of neglect and salvaging. It was a ship unlike anything Serat had seen before. The ship had clearly been repurposed, retrofitted from the wreckage of the last ACAT war. Its patched exterior, once a symbol of destruction, now carried with it an air of unpredictable chaos. The humans began to disembark in droves. Serat observed them with a mix of fascination and trepidation. Where most species would arrive in groups of 100 or so, the humans seemed to appear by the thousands. They spilled out of the transport, their voices rising in a cacophony of chatter, laughter, and excitement. Serat had never seen such a display. The other delegates looked on in confusion, and Serat could see the unease growing among the more reserved species. The humans, it seemed, were not bound by the same norms as everyone else. As the crowd of humans swarmed into the arena, Serat's eyes widened in disbelief. They weren't just here to participate. They were here to dominate. Each human appeared to be carrying a plant in some sort of container. Some of the plants were in traditional planters, while others were stuffed into makeshift pots of all shapes and sizes. The sheer volume of plants they had brought was staggering. It was as if they had brought an entire garden with them, not just a single species as per the competition's rules. Serat's multi-jointed legs carried him through the crowd, towering over the humans as he made his way to the center of the arena. He glanced at Gon, his hatch sister, who was standing nearby. She was equally perplexed by the scene unfolding before them. Their species had always valued order and simplicity, and they had never encountered such an audacious disruption. When Serat finally reached the central podium, he took a deep breath, filling his lungs to their maximum capacity. His voice, deep and resonant, echoed across the arena. He raised a limb to signal for attention. "Attention," he bellowed, his tone firm and commanding. The noise from the human crowd slowly diminished, but not to the level of silence Serat had hoped for. It was still far louder than any of the previous years, and the chatter of the humans carried on in the background like a constant buzz. "We appreciate the enthusiasm of the newcomers," Serat began, his voice still carrying a hint of disbelief. "But I must remind you that each species is permitted to submit only one plant species to the competition. No more. This event has a long-standing tradition, and we must adhere to the rules." A voice from the back of the crowd called out, "We know, "We're just getting started." The humans laughed, seemingly oblivious to the seriousness of Surat's words. The response only served to confuse him further. He had expected a more respectful acknowledgement, but instead there was an air of casual nonchalance. This was not how the competition was meant to unfold. Surat scanned the crowd, taking in the vast array of plants that the humans had brought. He saw everything from what appeared to be vast clumps of leafy greens the size of a human head, to plants that resembled mismatched bundles of lumpy, misshapen greens. There were even what looked like hastily assembled craft projects, with small balls of leafy vegetation glued to thick stems. The diversity was dizzying, far beyond anything he had ever seen in this competition. A sudden realization struck him. The humans had ignored the guidelines in the most spectacular way possible. Not only had they brought an absurd number of plants, but they had somehow managed to turn the concept of a single species into something far more complicated. One human woman, standing near the front, held a planter that contained small, tightly packed green spheres attached to a thick stalk. "These are Brussels sprouts," she said defensively, her tone suggesting a hint of pride. Surat leaned down, examining the plants closely. They certainly didn't look like the typical Brussels sprouts he was familiar with, but the genetic analyzer would confirm their true nature. Another human, standing beside the woman, spoke up. "We're well aware of the submission guidelines," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But we've been researching previous competitions, and we saw that each species typically submits around 100 or fewer entries. So we thought, why not bring more?" Surat's mind reeled. He had expected diversity in the forms of edible plants, but this was something else entirely. The humans had brought more than just a variety of plants. They had brought an entire concept of creativity, something that had never been seen before in a contest meant to be simple and straightforward. "What do you mean, why not bring more?" Surat asked, his confusion growing. "The competition is for a single plant, not this. You've turned it into a garden." He gestured toward the sea of planters, each holding something different, yet undeniably part of the same overarching theme. A few humans laughed, clearly amused by the misunderstanding. "We looked at past entries and noticed that each species had around 100 entries per cultivar," one explained. "So we figured if we had one plant species, we should bring as many varieties of it as possible to show off our creativity. Why limit ourselves to one?" Surat felt his frustration grow. The humans' misunderstanding had the potential to derail the entire competition, and yet there was a strange sense of awe he couldn't quite shake. They had broken the rules, but they had done so with such enthusiasm, and their creativity was impossible to ignore. For the first time in his life, Surat found himself at a loss for what to do. He knew that this year's competition was going to be unlike any other. The rules had been upended, and the flood of plants was just the beginning. The unexpected variety. As the humans continued to pour into the arena, their laughter and chatter swirled around Surat like an unrelenting storm. The sheer number of them was astonishing, and the array of plants they brought only added to the overwhelming spectacle. The once orderly competition had been turned into a chaotic garden of possibilities. Surat stood frozen in place, a towering figure in the midst of the madness, trying to comprehend the scope of what was unfolding before him. For centuries, the Galactic Edible Plant Competition had been a model of simplicity. Each species was permitted to bring a single plant species, no more, no less. This simplicity was a fundamental principle that had kept the competition fair and manageable. Yet, here the humans were, turning this long-established tradition into something entirely different. Surat glanced at Gon, his hatch-sister, who was standing nearby, her long, graceful limbs folded across her chest in a posture of deep contemplation. Her eyes were narrowed, and she seemed as uncertain as he was about how to proceed. It was clear that this was not what they had prepared for. They had expected to oversee a neat, straightforward event, not the explosion of creativity that now lay before them. The humans, for their part, seemed blissfully unaware of the chaos they had caused. They bustled around with an infectious energy, each of them proudly holding up their plants for inspection. There were no lines, no order, just a disorganized collection of individuals all clamoring for attention. It was a sight that both confused and fascinated Surat. The first human who had spoken up earlier, the one who had introduced the Brussels sprouts, was now at the front of the crowd, eagerly explaining the concept behind their approach. "We didn't want to limit ourselves to one kind of plant," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "So we brought the same species, but we grew it in different forms. We've got different colors, different shapes, and even different uses. It's all the same plant, but with endless possibilities." Surat's gaze shifted from the woman to the numerous planters she held in her hands. Each one seemed to carry a different variation of the same species. There were leaf varieties, root types, and even flowers, all blooming from the same basic genetic foundation. He reached out, his long fingers brushing the edges of one planter to inspect the plant more closely. It was a deep green leafy vegetable, but its leaves were more tightly curled than the others he had seen before. He scanned the plant with his exome analyzer, confirming that it was indeed the same species. This was no ordinary submission. It was a work of creativity and modification that Surat could barely begin to comprehend. "Are you telling me," Surat asked, his voice trembling with the weight of his confusion, "that all of these are the same plant? Just modified versions?" The human woman nodded eagerly. "Exactly. We've taken the base species and cultivated it in different ways. Some are better for eating raw, others for cooking. Some are ornamental, some are practical. We wanted to show how versatile a single species can be." Surat's mind raced. This was no longer a simple competition about the best edible plant. It had become something much more complicated. A contest of innovation, of boundless creativity. It was clear that the humans had come not to follow the rules, but to break them, to expand them beyond anything the judges had imagined. What they had created was a living testament to the power of human ingenuity. Yet, Surat still couldn't quite grasp the full scope of their reasoning. Why had they done this? Why had they decided to flood the competition with an overwhelming variety of what, to Surat's eyes, was the same plant? Gan, always the more pragmatic of the two, stepped forward, her tall form moving with practiced grace. She exchanged a glance with Surat before addressing the human woman directly. "You've brought an impressive array of variations," she began, her voice even, "but you've also flooded the competition. How do you expect us to judge these? How can we evaluate each variation when there are so many?" The woman's face lit up with understanding. "Ah, I see what you mean," she said. "We didn't intend to overwhelm you, but rather to show the potential of this one plant species. Think of it as a demonstration of possibility. Each variation highlights something different, a unique characteristic, a different potential use. By seeing all the variations side by side, you can better understand the full potential of the species. Maybe next year, you'll consider opening up the competition to include more diverse cultivars, or perhaps even different types of edible plants." Surat blinked in surprise. This was not the response he had expected. It was as though the human woman had anticipated his concerns and already had a solution in mind. He had assumed that the humans had simply misunderstood the rules, but it seemed they had a much grander vision. They were not just participating in the contest. They were trying to redefine it. As Surat mulled over her words, another human approached him, holding a planter full of what appeared to be miniature cabbages. "It's the same species," the human said with a grin, "but it's been adapted for small spaces, like apartments or urban gardens. It's all about finding ways to make the plant more accessible to people, no matter where they live." Surat's exome analyzer buzzed, confirming that it was indeed the same species as the others. He was struck once again by the sheer ingenuity of the humans. They hadn't just altered the plants for aesthetic reasons or to increase yield. They had tailored them for practicality, for a wider range of environments and lifestyles. It was a level of thoughtfulness that Surat had never encountered before in a competition like this. Gan, sensing Surat's growing uncertainty, spoke up again. "Perhaps we should take a step back," she suggested, her voice steady. "We don't want to overcomplicate things, but we also don't want to dismiss what these humans have done. We should review the plants more closely, perhaps find a way to judge them fairly, even if it means altering the criteria." Surratt nodded slowly, still feeling a bit overwhelmed by the sheer number of entries. The humans had thrown a wrench into the works, but they had also given him something new to think about. For centuries, the competition had been about evaluating a single species at a time. But now, the humans had introduced the concept of variation within a single species. It was a fascinating idea, one that could change the way the competition was approached in the future. Before Surratt could say anything further, the head judge, a member of the Ixra species, arrived at the podium. The Ixra were known for their calm demeanor and their ability to navigate even the most stressful situations. Their species had a long history of mediation and conflict resolution, which made them the perfect choice to lead the judging panel. As the Ixra judge stepped forward, they raised a hand, signaling for quiet. "This year's competition has certainly presented us with new challenges," the Ixra judge said, their voice carrying across the arena. "But we must remember that the heart of this contest has always been about recognizing the potential of a single species and how that species can be enhanced and celebrated. While the human entries may seem unconventional, we must respect their approach. This is not just about a plant. It's about the creativity that goes into nurturing and evolving life." The words of the Ixra judge resonated deeply with Surratt. It was true. The humans had broken the rules, but they had done so in a way that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. For the first time, Surratt wondered if the competition itself needed to evolve. Perhaps it was time to rethink the way they evaluated plants, to embrace the idea of variation within a single species as the humans had done. The decision was made then and there. The human entries would be judged on their creativity, innovation, and practical use, rather than strictly adhering to the rule of one plant species per entry. The competition would still hold its core principles, but it would now allow for the kind of diversity that the humans had brought. It was a compromise, but it was also an evolution. As Surratt and Gon stepped away from the podium, they exchanged a look that spoke volumes. The humans had changed the course of the competition, but perhaps, just perhaps, they had also changed the future of agriculture itself. The exome analyzer's revelation. The atmosphere in the arena was electric as the competition continued to unfold. Surratt and Gon stood on the sidelines, watching the judges deliberate. For the first time in the history of the Galactic Edible Plant Competition, the rules had been bent to accommodate the unprecedented variety of plant cultivars brought by the humans. It was a decision that still puzzled Surratt, even as he observed the excitement swirling around the arena. The humans, with their boundless enthusiasm, had broken every expectation. They had turned the competition into something unrecognizable, and yet, despite his reservations, Surratt could not deny that there was something awe-inspiring about their approach. As the judges continued to evaluate the submissions, Surratt's thoughts kept drifting back to the exome analyzer he had used earlier. The device, which had been a trusted tool for years, had been indispensable in confirming that all of the human plants, regardless of their variations, belonged to the same species. Surratt's mind raced as he pondered the implications of what he had discovered. The humans had presented a single plant species, yes, but they had manipulated it in ways that defied Surratt's understanding of agriculture. These weren't just simple cultivars. They were entirely different expressions of a single plant's genetic potential. Each variant was tailored for a different purpose. Some were more nutrient-dense for cooking, others were ideal for ornamental purposes, and yet others were designed to thrive in specific climates. The depth of human ingenuity was becoming clear to him, and it was both fascinating and overwhelming. Surratt could not help but feel a growing sense of unease. The exome analyzer, which had always been reliable, had confirmed the genetic identity of the plants. But what the analyzer could not reveal was the intent behind these modifications. Had the humans altered their plants in a way that could be deemed unethical? Were they pushing the boundaries of genetic engineering too far? What if the humans were manipulating these plants in ways that could have unintended consequences on ecosystems beyond the competition? These were the questions that began to gnaw at Sarat, pulling him into a spiral of doubt. He glanced at Gon, who stood beside him, her long limbs folded across her chest, her expression unreadable. She had been quiet ever since the judges had decided to allow the humans entries, and Sarat suspected that she was wrestling with similar thoughts. The Sarat species had always prided itself on maintaining order, ensuring that rules were adhered to, and that the consequences of innovation were carefully considered. The humans, it seemed, had thrown all of that into disarray. Finally, Gon spoke, her voice low but firm. "Sarat," she began, her tone not one of reproach, but of contemplation. "We've seen the exome analyzer's results. There's nothing inherently dangerous about these plants, but there's something about this whole situation that feels off. I've been thinking, too. We need to consider the broader implications of what the humans have done. Their creativity is astounding, but I can't shake the feeling that they've opened a door that shouldn't be opened." Sarat nodded slowly, appreciating Gon's insight. "I've been thinking the same thing," he said, his voice heavy. "The plants are fine. Their genetics are sound. But I can't help but wonder where this path might lead. What happens when other species start doing the same? Will we see more entries like this in the future? Will it become the new standard? What happens when a single plant species is manipulated so extensively that it no longer resembles its original form?" Gon's gaze softened as she regarded him. "You're right to question this. The humans may have found a way to manipulate their plants in creative and practical ways, but there's a difference between innovation and recklessness. We don't know where this could lead, and that's what worries me. Genetic manipulation is a powerful tool, but it's not without risks." Sarat exhaled slowly, his mind filled with the weight of their conversation. As a species, the Sarat had always been cautious when it came to the unknown. They valued stability and predictability, two qualities that were now being challenged by the humans' bold approach. For the first time in a long while, Sarat found himself at a crossroads. The competition, which had once seemed so straightforward, had become a forum for new ideas, ideas that might very well change the course of history. The humans' unseen genius. As Sarat and Gon continued to mull over their concerns, the competition proceeded, and the humans remained at the center of attention. Each time a human presented their plant, they offered a brief explanation of its unique characteristics. One human proudly showed off a plant that had been modified to grow in the harshest environments, thriving in what would otherwise be barren deserts. Another presented a version of the plant with deep purple leaves, claiming that it had higher levels of nutrients, making it ideal for underprivileged areas where food scarcity was a problem. The creativity was undeniable, and the implications of such innovations began to dawn on Sarat. The humans weren't just presenting plants for consumption. They were showing how one species could be adapted to serve countless purposes. They had turned a simple contest into a platform for global, and perhaps even galactic, change. This wasn't about winning a prize. It was about pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But as Sarat watched, he also noticed something else. The other species, while intrigued by the humans' ingenuity, were becoming visibly uncomfortable. The Sarat, like many others, valued simplicity. They did not like what they saw as unnecessary complexity. The sight of humans manipulating a single plant to create such a vast range of variations unsettled many. The pressure was mounting, and Sarat could sense the tension in the air. The other competitors, who had adhered to the rules and brought a single plant species, exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered among themselves, clearly frustrated by the human entries, while others simply stared in disbelief. The rules had been bent, and some species felt that the integrity of the competition had been compromised. It was clear that this was no longer just about plants. It was about the very essence of the competition itself. What would the judges decide? The judge's decision. At long last, the judging process came to an end. Serat gone, and the other officials waited as the head judge. The wise and impartial Ixra gathered the results. The Ixra were renowned for their diplomatic skills and their ability to remain calm under pressure, and Serat trusted that they would find a fair way to resolve the situation. The Ixra judge, standing tall at the center of the podium, raised a hand to silence the room. The arena fell into complete stillness, and all eyes turned toward the judge. The humans, their faces a mix of anticipation and excitement, crowded near the front. The other delegates waited nervously, unsure of what to expect. This year's competition has been unlike any other. The Ixra judge began, their voice resonating with calm authority. While the guidelines were clear, the creativity and innovation brought forth by the humans have challenged the very foundation of this contest. And while this has created some confusion and discomfort among certain species, we must acknowledge the brilliance of their approach. Serat's chest tightened as the Ixra continued. This competition has always been about showcasing the potential of edible plants, but it is also about recognizing the ingenuity of those who nurture life. The humans have shown us that the limits of a single plant species can be stretched in ways we never imagined. It is clear that their entries have added new dimensions to the contest, and for that, we must recognize their contributions. The decision was made. The humans' entries would be awarded special recognition for their creativity and the novel ways in which they had manipulated their plants. They would not win the top prize. That honor still went to a more traditional entry, but the humans would leave the competition with something far more valuable: the respect and admiration of the galaxy's most esteemed species. Serat, though still uncertain about the long-term implications, could not help but feel a sense of awe as the humans cheered their victory. They had disrupted the competition, yes, but they had also opened up new possibilities. As the crowd dispersed, Serat turned to Gon. "Perhaps this is just the beginning," he said softly. "Maybe we need to rethink our approach, not just to this competition, but to life itself. The humans have shown us that there are no limits, only new horizons." Gon smiled, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps, Serat, perhaps we've been too focused on what we know. The humans have taught us that the future is never set in stone, and that's something we can all learn from." As the two Serat officials walked away from the arena, they knew that their world and the universe had changed forever.